This is from class. We started some of this information. We're going to be talking about literacy and how it's part of our curriculum. Even though you don't, you're not taking it out of from a book. You're understanding components and then building them into the children's interests as their curiosities arise. Okay, so what we're going to be learning about, which I do present over and over again, so that you begin to understand and just like internalize it and not have to like go look it up every time, is the 5 predictors of early literacy. And what this is about is if there's a program that includes these components, there is research that says that children will have a better be able to learn to read and write more easily because of these components. So we have oral language, which is our foundation of future literacy, and I think it's called that because the first thing we're going to do with children from birth, maybe even in the womb, although that won't be the teacher's job, we're talking and we're exposing and building a vocabulary that the children are exposed to. And then phonemic awareness. We're going to learn about what each of these things are as we go through. So we have phonemic awareness, alphabetic awareness, concepts of print, and early writing and inventive spelling. There we go. So let's start with, I think that video is really one of the best things to summarize that I've found for the 5 predictors. But we know that you and I learn from hearing things over and over again and putting them in our own context. So I'm going to build on what that video was saying and probably repeat it a little bit, but narrate, 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 right? So the younger the child, we're talking infants, we should be talking all the time. We should be narrating their world. We should share stories, maybe nursery rhymes and doing the rhyming, the poems, the songs, etc. And then throughout the day, part of our curriculum for literacy, that is part of our curriculum. So we have to realize that curriculum's much broader than a lot of the times we think it is. Like people will tell you that you're going to get like a book that gives you the curriculum, but if you really have been tuned in, you're going to realize that what teachers do is so much more contextual and way beyond anything you could buy in a book. You can't like buy a script, right? I mean, you could buy a script for certain lessons, but then it's not going to be student led, and it's probably not going to be authentic for you because it's going to be in someone else's like language or a way, their fit to their best strengths. So rich teacher talk, we're going to learn a little bit about this semester. It's not enough to just say something. It's like becoming much more obvious that we need to actually expand upon that and think about what we're saying and be very meaningful and intentional in the things, in the way we speak to children. Okay. So that was a video about the oral language, right? So when talking with children, a couple of just probably already mentioned or whatever, use rare words. So you're building that vocabulary. I think it's really underestimated when they said 2,500 words a year. There is a book that I taught a couple of semesters where you, from the time of birth to like kindergarten, they're recommending that you expose children to 30 million words. So 2,500 just doesn't seem to be enough. But anyway, I think, so how a lot of times where things can be called different things. That's a way to expand vocabulary, giving the different names or labels that we talk about things with, expanding it that way is good. Rare words, I don't know. I mean, a really rare word that kids don't really need to know, that's not the thing I think about. It's more like different, like one of the books we're reading, Cindy's book, talked about using a lot of different words to talk about our emotions, naming things in several different ways as appropriate. It talked in this video about extending children's comments into like, okay, so you're taking what the children said, child-directed speech, what the child says, and then you are very Vygotskian in a very Vygotskian way. You are taking what they say and then you're building on it to kind of take it to an upper level. So it's that zone of proximal development. So you meet the child where they are and then you add to it. It talks about like, so not like being like, well, that's not grammatically correct. But when you repeat back what the child's saying, then you provide the model of what it would sound like if you were saying it in what's considered grammatically correct. Okay, or you add more descriptions. Discussing cognitive challenging content, topics that are not immediately present, that involve knowledge about the world, or that encourage children to reflect on language as an object. So again, taking what the children are interested in and then kind of building that construction of knowledge about their area of interest, and that is automatically like expanding their language, their understanding of the world, society, etc. And then really being present, obviously, to children. A lot of times we get really busy and we're like telling children what we got to do, what we're going to do next, yada, yada, yada. But if what you got to get down at the children's level, like 90% of the time, you should be down on, they should not have to be looking up at you like all day long. You should be down and you should be making an effort to really hear what they say, not dismissing it. Phonemic awareness, hear, identify, and manipulate sounds in a language. That's like the definition. And then listening and learning, like how are these sounds the same or how are they different? And patterns in words. The next slide is like a short video about phonemic awareness. But patterns in words, that's automatically, you can start building in some math talk. Phonemic awareness is also just going to make that sounding out of words easier later on. And this is something we might get to in poems, rhymes, singing. I used to sing that Willoughby Wallaby song, I think it's a Rafi board book I had. But when it was time to go, like whose turn it was to get lunch or to get to wash, Willoughby Wallaby Wara, the elephant sat on Laura. And so they're listening for that one consonant sound that's different. And then they're trying to find the name in the classroom that rhymes. That's a very easy way to do phonemic awareness. And then we have alphabetic knowledge. I thought that was going to have the phonemic awareness video. It'll be interesting to see if that's really in there. So alphabetic knowledge, I think a lot of times we assume alphabetic knowledge is like, oh, they know their ABC song or whatever. They're learning their ABCs when they look at them, but it's actually quite a bit broader than that. And we talked about this in the class today when you watch the recording, but you know, alphabetic knowledge, that's going to start getting built from print, print, environmental print, from seeing that there's like letters that they don't understand what they symbolize in the books we read. And so alphabetic knowledge is like a level of knowing that there's letters and what those letters are named. How do those letters, what do they sound like? Like, what is the sound that those letters represent? And then what is the purpose of letters? And because the really big jump is that it's not good enough to know the letters. You got to know how those letters go together to make words, right? So that's huge. That's a lot. And again, this isn't like, I mean, I will say kindergarten teachers probably, I remember mine had those letter people. But that, when you take everything out of context and you're just having people, learn letters and maybe that has value. I'm sure I learned something from it, but what I believe, but this is what I went to college, it was what we were studying when I was in college in this swings, is this more whole language approach where it's like something where they're learning this all day long, not just during letter people time, right? It needs to be like literacy, and that's not just the reading of the book, but it's all these components should be throughout the day, throughout the content. And if you're a teacher that's knowledgeable about how to do that, you are going to provide an environment that can really allow children to thrive, and that will help children later on continue to have an easier time with literacy, reading. So concepts of print, I usually spend a ton of time on this. So we have environmental print, and that's something I think it should start really from the infant room, although of course in the infant room that's not always as necessary, right? But I think it's good to have those things posted in the room. It gives like if you have photos of families and you have the names or whatever of those families, then that also helps parents talk about whatever they see in the photos. Um, and it might just, if you see a label on something, you're more likely to talk about it. Like it just organically provides that opportunity. And then I spend a lot of time on read aloud practices, and maybe I almost like, because I have the literacy masters, to me, reading aloud to children and the storytelling piece, that's the most important thing. What are you talking about? And I don't know that everybody always understands how much children are learning when you're reading to them, because yes, it's a beautiful experience, often a lot of fun, because especially when it's one-on-one and you get to have that closeness. But I don't even know, because we have such bizarre ideas of what's academic. I don't even know if people realize like all the things that people are exposed to. I have a feeling it'll be interesting. I'm wondering, like, let's see what's next. I'll be excited. All right, so the early writing piece, well, some of our early writing stuff, and that's not really on here, but Cindy will talk about it in her book, um, is really like you have to get their muscles strong enough to write. So we want to have opportunities to color and to paint and to build those muscles in our hands. But there's also, by the time they're in pre-K, they can have a journal. Cindy has a wonderful chapter in her book where all of the pre-Kers in her classes had a journal, and that didn't mean they were writing long sentences, right? They might have been coloring, drawing, whatever, drawing their feeling, drawing Leo Leone. They read Leo Leone. What do you want? How do you want to draw? If you were going to represent what we just read, what would you draw? Put it in your journal or whatever. Or how did this make you feel? And so journals and using like a crayon or a marker or anything like that, those are early writing. And then the signing in is a big thing. And I think that's a good idea, because that's connecting that the name represents you and it has a purpose and everything. But the real inventive spelling, I mean, there may be some pre-K kids that'll do inventive spelling, but you have to have a pretty good foundation in that whole phonics thing. So for me, inventive spelling is probably more of a kindergarten, first grade kind of a thing. I haven't seen a ton of pre-K kids doing that. And you want to make sure you're doing that zone of proximal development. You don't want to be really pushing things that kids aren't really ready for, because it's going to make them feel like failure and really not like learning, or their idea of what they think learning is.